Jake Torres wiped the grease from his hands and stared up at the massive alien warship hovering in the repair dock. The thing was enormous, easily 3 times the size of any human vessel he'd worked on back in the Sol system. Its hull gleamed with an iridescent purple-blue sheen that seemed to shift in the station's artificial lighting. Elegant curves and swooping lines gave it an organic appearance, like some massive sea creature frozen mid-swim. But Jake knew better than to let the beauty fool him. This was the Void's Whisper, a Keltharian battleship with enough firepower to level a small moon. The problem was that right now, it couldn't level much of anything. "You are the human engineer?" a voice chittered from behind him. Jake turned to see a Keltharian officer approaching. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and smooth gray skin that caught the light like polished stone. 2 large black eyes dominated a face that had no nose, just small breathing slits above a narrow mouth. The officer wore a crisp uniform of deep crimson with silver markings that Jake assumed indicated rank. "That's me," Jake said, extending his hand before remembering that Keltharians didn't shake hands. He awkwardly converted the gesture into a sort of wave. "Jake Torres, freelance mechanic and engineer. Your distress beacon said you needed someone who thinks outside the box." The officer's head tilted in what Jake had learned was the Keltharian equivalent of a nod. "I am Commander Zekthil, first officer of the Void's Whisper. Our chief engineer assured Captain Vecnir that our propulsion issues were minor. 3 weeks later, we are still trapped in this repair station, missing crucial patrol assignments. The captain's patience has expired." Jake grabbed his toolkit, a battered metal case covered in stickers from a dozen different space stations. "Walk me through what's happening." As they made their way up the boarding ramp, Zekthil explained the situation. The Void's Whisper had suffered damage during a skirmish with pirates near the Outer Rim territories. Nothing catastrophic, just some hits to the engine compartment. But ever since the fight, the ship's performance had degraded steadily. The maximum speed had dropped by 40%. The power cores couldn't maintain full output for more than a few minutes before overheating. Worst of all, the weapon systems kept cycling offline at random intervals. "Your engineer couldn't figure it out?" Jake asked as they walked through corridors that seemed to pulse with soft, bioluminescent lighting. "Engineer Tolvid insists the repairs are complete," Zekthil said, and Jake caught what might have been frustration in the alien's tone. "All diagnostic systems show green. By every measure, the ship should function perfectly, yet it does not." They reached the engine room, and Jake let out a low whistle. The space was massive, easily the size of a basketball court, filled with elegant machinery that hummed and glowed with power. Crystalline structures rose from the floor like trees, pulsing with energy. Conduits of flowing light connected everything in a web of organized complexity. It was beautiful. It was also completely wrong. A shorter Keltharian with intricate tattoos covering his arms looked up from a console. "Commander, I must protest. Bringing in an outsider, a human no less, suggests a lack of confidence in my abilities." "Your abilities are not in question, Tolvid," Zekthil said smoothly. "Your results are. The human will assess the situation. You will provide him full access and cooperation." Jake set down his toolkit and walked slowly around the engine room, his eyes taking in every detail. He'd studied Keltharian engineering during his certification courses, but book learning was different from seeing it in person. The Keltharians were masters of elegant design. Their technology flowed like water, everything connected in harmonious balance. Human engineering tended to be more brutal, more direct. If something needed to move, you put a motor on it. If something needed power, you fed it more juice. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. He stopped in front of one of the main power conduits and frowned. "When you took damage, what exactly got hit?" Tolvid pulled up a holographic display showing the ship's schematics. Red markers indicated the damaged sections. 3 impacts, here, here, and here. Hull breaches in sections 7, 12, and 19. All have been repaired. The damaged components were replaced with new units from our stores. And the replacements were exact matches? Jake asked. Of course, Tolvid said, sounding offended. We maintain precise inventory. Every component meets exact specifications. Jake knelt down and examined the base of a power crystal. Something about it looked off. The glow was steady, the connection seemed solid, but there was something wrong that he couldn't quite identify. He pulled out a small handheld scanner from his toolkit, an ugly contraption he'd built himself from salvaged parts. Tolvid made a disgusted sound at the sight of it. The scanner beeped and displayed readings that made Jake's eyebrows rise. Huh, that's interesting. What is interesting? Zekthil asked. Your power flow is synchronized, Jake said, standing up and moving to another crystal. He scanned it and got similar results. Everything is running at exactly the same frequency, perfectly balanced. That is correct, Tolvid said. Proper Keltharian engineering requires harmonic balance. All systems must resonate together. Yeah, see, that's your problem, Jake said. He moved to a third crystal and confirmed his suspicion. These three crystals, the ones you replaced after the damage, they're running at exactly the same frequency as everything else, but they shouldn't be. Both Keltharians stared at him. Explain, Zekthil commanded. Jake sat down on the deck, his mind racing as he worked through the problem. Okay, so you know how a guitar works, right? Different strings, different thicknesses, all tuned to make different notes. If you tune all the strings to exactly the same note, you don't get harmony, you just get one boring sound. Our systems require synchronization, Tolvid insisted. Sure, for most of it, but not everything. These three crystals, Jake pointed to the replacements. In your original configuration, I bet they were slightly out of sync. Not much, maybe just a fraction of a percent. But that tiny difference created a kind of interference pattern that actually helped distribute power more efficiently. It's like when you have two waves that overlap and create a bigger wave. He pulled out a tablet and started sketching diagrams, his fingers flying across the screen. Your old crystals, the ones that got destroyed, they probably had microscopic imperfections from years of use. Those imperfections created tiny variations in frequency. Your new crystals are perfect, factory fresh, zero variation. So now everything is too synchronized, and you're losing the constructive interference that made the system work better than it should. Tolvid's eyes widened. That is not possible. Perfect synchronization is the goal of all Keltharian engineering. Is it, though? Jake asked. He stood up and gestured at the engine room. Because from what I'm seeing, your ancestors who designed these ships were actually counting on a little bit of chaos in the system. They just didn't write it down, maybe didn't even realize it was happening. Over time, components wear in, develop character, and the ship performs better than when it was brand new. You've probably heard old ship captains talk about how their vessels have personality, right? This is why. Zekthil stepped closer, studying Jake's rough diagrams. You are suggesting we intentionally unbalance our power systems. Not unbalance, optimize. There's a difference. Jake grabbed his scanner again and took more readings. Look, give me 6 hours alone in here. Let me try something. If it doesn't work, you can throw me off your ship and I won't charge you a credit. But if I'm right, I can get you back to full power and then some. The two Keltharians exchanged looks, communicating in ways Jake couldn't read. Finally, Zekthil spoke. You may proceed, but Tolvid will remain to observe. Fair enough, Jake said, already pulling tools from his kit. Just try to stay out of my way. As the commander left, Jake got to work. He started with the power crystals, using his scanner to map their exact frequencies. Then he pulled out what looked like a small hammer with various attachments. Tolvid watched in horror as Jake selected a tiny, diamond-tipped instrument. What are you doing? The Keltharian engineer demanded. Introducing microfractures, Jake said calmly. He placed the tool against the first crystal and activated it. A high-frequency vibration created hairline cracks, invisible to the naked eye, but enough to slightly alter the crystal's resonant frequency. Don't worry, this won't damage the structural integrity, just creates a tiny variation in output frequency. He worked methodically, testing and adjusting each of the 3 replacement crystals. It was delicate work, requiring constant monitoring to make sure he didn't go too far. Too much variation and the system would destabilize. Too little and nothing would change. He needed to find the sweet spot where controlled chaos became constructive. Hours passed. Jake lost himself in the work, the way he always did. This was what he loved about engineering. Not the theory, not the pristine elegance of perfect designs, but the messy reality of making things work. Every system had quirks. Every machine had personality. The trick was learning to work with that instead of against it. Power readings are changing, Tolvid said suddenly. The Keltharian had been silent for so long that Jake had almost forgotten he was there. Core temperature is dropping. Efficiency is increasing by 3%, 4%, 5%. Jake grinned. Now we're cooking. Watch this. He made one final adjustment to the 3rd crystal, tapping it with careful precision. The engine room suddenly blazed with light. The crystals pulsed with renewed energy, and the hum of the power cores deepened to a satisfying thrum that Jake felt in his chest. Every display in the room showed green, but more than that, they showed improved performance across the board. Impossible, Tolvid whispered, staring at his instruments. We are exceeding rated capacity by 8%, 9%, 10%, and stabilizing. Not impossible, Jake said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Just different. Sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. Sometimes you need a little chaos to make things work better. The door to the engine room hissed open, and Zekthil strode in, followed by another Keltharian wearing even more elaborate uniform decorations. This had to be the captain. Report, the captain said, her voice carrying authority that made even Jake stand a little straighter. Captain Vecnir, Tolvid said, still staring at his readings in disbelief. The human has increased our power efficiency by 10%. All systems are operating above rated specifications. I do not understand how, but the results are undeniable. Captain Vecnir's large eyes focused on Jake. Human engineer, you have accomplished in hours what my crew could not in weeks. Explain your methods. Jake launched into his explanation again, trying to keep it simple. The captain listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Your approach contradicts centuries of Keltharian engineering philosophy, she finally said. And yet the evidence suggests you are correct. Fascinating. Tell me, Jake Torres, can you improve other systems using these principles? Jake felt a grin spreading across his face. Captain, I thought you'd never ask. Captain Vecnir stood in the command center of the Void's Whisper, watching her crew work with an efficiency she hadn't seen in weeks. The bridge was circular, with workstations arranged around a central holographic display showing the ship in surrounding space. Soft blue lighting gave everything an ethereal quality. Through the massive forward viewport, she could see the repair stations slowly receding as they moved away under their own power for the first time in far too long. All systems responding within normal parameters, reported the helm officer, a young Keltharian named Picnil. Actually, they're responding better than normal parameters, Captain. The ship feels more responsive. That would be our human engineer's work, Vecnir said. She turned to Zekthil, who stood at her right hand as always. Status report on his progress. Jake Torres has been working for 3 days straight, Zekthil said, consulting a datapad. He has modified the power distribution network, adjusted the atmospheric recycling systems, and somehow improved our shield generator's efficiency by 12%. Engineer Tolvid is having difficulty accepting the changes, but he cannot argue with the results. Vecnir allowed herself a small smile. Tolvid was an excellent engineer, trained in the finest Keltharian academies with certifications that covered an entire wall of his quarters. But he was also rigid, bound by tradition and orthodox thinking. The human, by contrast, seemed to view every rule as a suggestion and every established practice as something to be questioned. It was infuriating. It was also exactly what her ship had needed. "I want to speak with him," Vecnir said. "Have him report to the bridge when he reaches a stopping point. And make sure he eats something. Humans require more frequent feeding than we do, and I have noticed he forgets to take meals when focused on work." Jake arrived on the bridge an hour later, his clothes stained with various substances that Vecnir preferred not to identify. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and he carried a data pad covered in scrawled notes and diagrams. Several crew members looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to distaste. Humans were rare this far from their home system, and Jake's disheveled appearance didn't match the neat efficiency of Caltharian standards. "Captain, you wanted to see me?" Jake asked, seeming unbothered by the attention. "Yes, walk with me." Vecnir led him to a side corridor where they could speak privately. "Your modifications have exceeded my expectations. My crew reports that the ship feels different, more alive. But I want to understand something. Your techniques, this approach of intentional imperfection. Is this common among human engineers?" Jake laughed, a short bark of amusement. "God, no. Well, maybe? It's complicated. See, human engineering is kind of a mess. We don't have one unified philosophy like you Caltharians. We've got dozens of different approaches, different schools of thought. Some human engineers are obsessed with perfection and precision. Others embrace what we call kludges, quick fixes that shouldn't work but somehow do." "And you?" Vecnir asked. "Which type are you?" "I'm the type who learned early on that the universe doesn't care about our plans," Jake said. He leaned against the wall, his posture casual in a way that would have been disrespectful from a Caltharian, but somehow worked for him. "I grew up on a mining station in the asteroid belt. Nothing was new, everything was broken, and we couldn't afford to wait for proper replacement parts. You learn to improvise. You learn to make things work with whatever you've got. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the improvisations often work better than the original designs." He pulled up something on his data pad and showed it to her. It was a hopelessly tangled diagram that hurt to look at. "This is a human ship's power system. It's a nightmare. Nothing is standardized. Every component is from a different manufacturer, and the whole thing is held together with electrical tape and prayers. But you know what? It works. It's redundant, it's adaptable, and it's nearly impossible to completely disable because there's always another workaround." "Chaos," Vecnir said. "Controlled chaos," Jake corrected. "There's a method to the madness. Humans call it fault tolerance. We build systems assuming they're going to break, assuming we're going to need to patch and repair and modify on the fly. Your Caltharian systems are beautiful and elegant, but they assume everything will work perfectly. When something goes wrong, it all goes wrong at once." Vecnir considered this. It was uncomfortably accurate. The Caltharian Empire had controlled vast territories for thousands of years, built on the foundation of superior technology and engineering. Their ships were works of art, their systems perfect examples of harmonious design. But that perfection came with a price. When things broke, they often broke catastrophically, and repairs required exact replacements, precise calibrations, extensive downtime. "Could our ships be built with this fault tolerance?" she asked. "Sure, but your people would hate it," Jake said bluntly. "It would mean accepting imperfection as a feature, not a bug. It would mean building in redundancy and backup systems that seem wasteful. It would mean training engineers to think creatively instead of by the book." He paused. "No offense to Tolvid, he's brilliant, but he's brilliant within a very specific framework." "And you operate outside frameworks entirely," Vecnir observed. "I operate in the gaps between frameworks," Jake said. "That's where the interesting stuff happens. That's where you find solutions nobody thought to look for." An alarm chimed softly, and Vecnir's communicator activated. Zekthil's voice came through. "Captain, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting a distress signal. It appears to be a civilian transport under attack by pirates." Vecnir and Jake hurried back to the bridge. The holographic display now showed a tactical overview. A small transport ship was highlighted in blue, surrounded by 3 red contacts that were clearly hostile vessels. The attack was taking place near a small moon in an uninhabited system, far from any regular patrol routes. "Distance?" Vecnir asked. 30 million kilometers, the sensor officer reported. "At our previous maximum speed, we would reach them in 42 minutes. Current projections say the transport shields will fail in approximately 20 minutes. "We won't make it," Zekthil said quietly. Jake stepped closer to the display, studying the distances in vectors. "What if we weren't at maximum speed?" Everyone turned to look at him. "Explain," Vecnir said. "Your engines are running more efficiently now than they ever have," Jake said, speaking quickly. "The improvements I made to the power systems mean you've got reserves you've never had before. What if we push past rated maximum? What if we redlined it?" "The engines are not designed for such stress," Tolvid objected. He had appeared on the bridge at some point, drawn by the emergency. "We could suffer catastrophic failures. Or we could save those people," Jake countered. "Look, I've done the math. Your engines can handle maybe 15–20% overrated maximum for short bursts. We're talking 10 minutes of hard burn, not hours. The risk is minimal." "The risk is unknown," Tolvid insisted. Vecnir looked between the 2 engineers, then at the display showing the transport ship's shields weakening under sustained fire. She made her decision. "Helm, prepare for maximum burn plus 15%, she ordered. "Jake Torres, get to the engine room and monitor the systems personally. If anything looks like it's going to fail, you tell me immediately." "On it," Jake said, already running for the door. Vecnir settled into her command chair. "All hands, battle stations. We have civilians in danger and very little time. Today we find out what the Void's Whisper is truly capable of. Engage engines now." The ship surged forward with a force that pressed everyone into their seats. The gentle hum of the engines became a roar. Through the viewport, stars stretched into lines as they accelerated past anything the ship had ever achieved. In the engine room, Jake watched displays filled with red warning indicators. The power crystals blazed with energy, pushed to their limits and beyond. Conduits glowed white-hot. Every system screamed in protest at what was being asked of it. He had a hand-built override device connected to the main controls, ready to shut everything down if it looked like something was going to explode. But it held. The modifications he'd made, the carefully introduced imperfections that created constructive interference, they were allowing the ship to handle loads it was never designed for. The crystals that should have been perfectly synchronized were instead creating complex wave patterns that distributed stress more evenly. It was working. "Jake, status!" Vecnir's voice came through his communicator. "We're in the red zone, but holding steady," Jake reported, watching the readings like a hawk. "Core temperature is high but stable. You've got 10 minutes at this speed before I recommend backing off." "Understood. Thank you, engineer." On the bridge, the tactical display updated rapidly. The distance to the transport ship dropped quickly. 8 million kilometers, 5 million, 2 million. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, the tactical officer reported. "Prepare all forward batteries," Vecnir ordered. "Target the pirate vessels. I want firing solutions on all 3. The Void's Whisper dropped out of its extreme burn, but the momentum carried them into the combat zone faster than the pirates could possibly have anticipated. Keltharian battleships were not known for speed. The pirates had been expecting at least 30 more minutes to finish looting the transport before any authorities arrived. They got 15 seconds. "Fire," Vecnir said calmly. The Void's Whisper's weapon systems, also boosted by Jake's modifications, unleashed a devastating barrage. The enhanced power distribution meant the energy weapons hit harder and recharged faster than they should have. The first pirate ship's shields collapsed under the initial volley. The second took critical damage and began venting atmosphere. The third attempted to flee, but found itself bracketed by precise fire that disabled its engines. The whole engagement lasted less than 2 minutes. "Cease fire," Vecnir ordered. "Hail the transport, and someone contact the nearest Keltharian security forces to collect these pirates." The transport's captain appeared on the view screen, a Veldrath trader with purple scales and expressions of profound relief. "Keltharian vessel, you have saved our lives and cargo. We detected you at extreme range, but thought we had no hope. How did you arrive so quickly?" "We had an advantage," Vecnir said, allowing herself a small smile. "A human engineer." In the engine room, Jake slumped against a bulkhead, exhausted but grinning. Tolvid stood nearby, staring at the displays showing engine performance data. "It should not have worked," the Keltharian engineer said quietly. "By every principle I was taught, what we just did should have destroyed the ship." "But it didn't," Jake said. "And that's the beautiful thing about engineering. Sometimes you have to break the rules to find out what's really possible." Tolvid turned to look at him, and Jake saw something shift in the alien's expression. "Teach me," Tolvid said. "I wish to understand your methods." Jake's grin widened. "Now you're talking. Pull up a seat and grab a scanner. We've got a lot of work to do." Word of the Void's Whisper's enhanced performance spread quickly through military and engineering channels. Captain Vecnir found herself receiving inquiries from Fleet Command, requests for detailed reports, and more than a few messages that ranged from skeptical to accusatory. The idea that a human freelance mechanic had improved a Keltharian warship beyond its rated specifications was difficult for many to accept. "Fleet Admiral Tekvor wishes to speak with you," Zekthil informed her. "He seems displeased." "I imagine he is," Vecnir said. She composed herself and accepted the communication in her ready room, a small office adjacent to the bridge. The Admiral appeared on her view screen, his elaborate uniform marking him as one of the highest-ranking officers in the Keltharian fleet. His expression was stern, his eyes hard. "Captain Vecnir, I have read your report regarding the modifications to your vessel. I have also consulted with 3 separate engineering review boards. They all agree that what you claim is impossible." "With respect, Admiral, my ship's performance logs tell a different story," Vecnir replied. "We achieved 115% of rated maximum speed for a sustained period. Our weapons efficiency has increased by 12%. Our shield generators are operating at unprecedented levels. These are measurable facts. Achieved through unsanctioned modifications by an uncertified human," the Admiral said coldly. "You allowed an outsider to tamper with military technology. You deviated from established protocols. You risked your ship and crew on unproven theories. I saved a civilian transport and captured 3 pirate vessels," Vecnir countered. "If I had followed standard procedures, we would have arrived too late. The transport would have been destroyed, its crew killed or captured. Instead, we achieved a perfect tactical victory with 0 casualties. I will defend my decision." The Admiral was quiet for a moment. "You placed me in a difficult position, Captain. If I reprimand you, I appear to be punishing success. If I approve your actions, I validate methods that contradict fundamental Keltharian engineering doctrine." He leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, do you believe this human's techniques are genuinely superior to our own?" Vecnir chose her words carefully. "I believe they are complementary, Admiral. The Keltharians excel at elegant design and harmonious systems. We build for beauty and efficiency. Humans build for survival and adaptability. Jake Torres showed me that our pursuit of perfection sometimes blinds us to practical improvements. His methods are not superior, they are different. And in combination with our established knowledge, they create something better than either alone." "Interesting perspective," the Admiral said. He seemed to relax slightly. Fleet Command has decided to send an engineering inspection team to your vessel. They will examine these modifications firsthand and determine if they can be replicated across the fleet. You and your human engineer will cooperate fully with their investigation. Understood, Admiral. One more thing, Captain. The civilian transport you saved was carrying the daughter of Council Member Vixtar. You may have inadvertently saved your career along with her life. The Council Member is very grateful and has been speaking in your defense. Consider yourself fortunate. The communication ended, and Vecnir allowed herself a moment of relief. She had gambled and won, but the stakes had been higher than she'd realized. If that transport had been destroyed despite their efforts, or if the Void's Whisper had suffered catastrophic failures during the high-speed burn, her career would have been over. She found Jake in his temporary quarters, a small cabin that he had somehow transformed into a disaster zone in just a few days. Tools and components covered every surface. Diagrams and calculations were scrawled on the walls using some kind of erasable marker he'd brought with him. It looked like organized chaos, which she supposed was fitting. Fleet Command is sending inspectors, she informed him. They want to examine your modifications and possibly implement them across the fleet. Jake looked up from whatever device he was tinkering with. That's great, although, fair warning, your inspectors are probably going to hate my methods. I don't exactly follow standard documentation procedures. I noticed, Vecnir said dryly, gesturing at the walls covered in human handwriting and cryptic symbols. But you will need to explain your techniques to them in a way they can understand and replicate. Can you do that? I can try, Jake said. But here's the thing, Captain. A lot of what I do is intuitive. I feel when something is right, when the frequencies are correct, when the system is balanced. I don't always know why it works until after I've made it work. That is deeply unsettling from an engineering perspective, Vecnir said. Yeah, I get that a lot. Jake set down his device and gave her his full attention. Look, I'll do my best to teach your people, but you need to understand that changing an entire fleet's engineering philosophy isn't going to happen overnight. Some Keltharians are going to resist. They're going to see my methods as crude or reckless. And honestly, they're not entirely wrong. What I do carries risks. It requires constant monitoring and adjustment. It's not fire and forget like your traditional systems. But it works, Vecnir said. It works, Jake agreed, and that's what matters in the end. The inspection team arrived 3 days later. 5 Keltharian engineers, all with impressive credentials and skeptical expressions. They spent hours examining every modification Jake had made, running tests, taking measurements, and asking increasingly technical questions. Jake did his best to explain his reasoning, but it was clear that some aspects of his approach didn't translate well. You intentionally introduced microfractures into military-grade power crystals, one inspector said, sounding horrified. These crystals cost thousands of credits each. You damage them. I optimize them, Jake corrected. The fractures are precisely controlled. They improve performance without compromising structural integrity. Look at the test results. These crystals are handling higher loads than undamaged ones. It contradicts all accepted practices, another inspector insisted. So did powered flight once, Jake shot back. So did faster than light travel. So did half the technology you're using right now. Somebody had to try something new, something that contradicted accepted practices, or we'd all still be banging rocks together. Tolvid, who had been observing the inspection, spoke up. I was skeptical as well, but I have monitored these systems continuously for days. The improvements are real and sustainable. More importantly, I have begun to understand the principles underlying Jake's approach. They are not random or reckless. They are based on a different understanding of how complex systems behave under stress. The lead inspector, an elderly Keltharian named Sivtal, studied Tolvid with interest. You support these modifications? I do, Tolvid said firmly. I request permission to study further with Jake Torres. I believe there is much humans and Keltharians can learn from each other. Sibtal turned to Jake. Human engineer, are you willing to share your knowledge freely with the Keltharian fleet? There would be compensation, of course, a formal consulting contract, access to our most advanced facilities, recognition for your contributions. Jake thought about it. He'd been freelancing for years, moving from station to station, taking jobs where he could find them. The idea of steady work, of resources and facilities beyond his usual cobbled-together toolkit was tempting. But there was something else, something more important. I'll do it, Jake said, but I've got conditions. First, any Keltharian engineer who wants to learn from me also has to teach me about your systems. This is a two-way exchange. Second, I want it understood that my methods are suggestions, not requirements. Every ship is different. Every system has its own personality. What worked on the Void's Whisper might need adjustments on other vessels. Third, I want protection for any engineer who tries something new and fails. Innovation requires room for mistakes. Those are unusual conditions, Siftal said. I'm an unusual engineer, Jake replied. Siftal's expression, difficult to read on a Keltharian face, might have been amusement. Very well, I will recommend to Fleet Command that we accept your terms. Welcome to the Keltharian Engineering Corps, Consultant Jake Torres. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself at the center of what some were calling an engineering revolution, and others were calling a disaster in progress. He worked with teams of Keltharian engineers, some eager to learn and others deeply resistant to his methods. He gave presentations that were equal parts technical lecture and philosophical debate. He modified systems, ran tests, and slowly began to build a body of documentation that others could follow. It wasn't easy. Cultural differences constantly created friction. Keltharians valued order, hierarchy, and established procedure. Jake valued results, innovation, and practical solutions. But gradually, bridges were built. Tolvid became Jake's closest collaborator. The Keltharian engineer had a gift for translating Jake's intuitive understanding into precise technical language that other Keltharians could grasp. Together, they developed a hybrid approach that combined Keltharian elegance with human adaptability. You have changed how I see engineering, Tolvid told Jake one evening as they reviewed test results. I was taught that there is one correct way to solve any problem. You have shown me that there are infinite ways, each with its own advantages. You've changed how I see it too, Jake admitted. Your people's attention to detail, your systematic approach, it's taught me to be more careful, more thorough. We make a good team. The real test came when Fleet Command selected 3 additional warships to receive Jake's modifications. These weren't just any ships, but vessels about to deploy to the contested border regions where tensions with the Draxian Confederacy were running high. If the modifications failed under combat conditions, the consequences could be severe. Jake personally oversaw the work on each ship, training their engineering teams and making adjustments for the unique characteristics of each vessel. It was exhausting work, but he thrived on the challenge. The flagship of the small fleet was the Dawn's Glory, commanded by Captain Kelsith, a veteran officer known for aggressive tactics. She watched Jake's work with intense interest. My ship has served for 40 years, she told him. I know every sound it makes, every vibration. You are changing its fundamental nature. I am trusting you not to break what has kept me and my crew alive through a dozen battles. I'm not changing what your ship is, Jake said. I'm helping it become what it always could have been. Trust me, Captain. When I'm done, the Dawn's Glory is going to feel like a new ship while still being exactly the ship you know. True to his word, the modifications enhanced the Dawn's Glory's performance while maintaining its essential character. The ship was faster, more efficient, more responsive, but it still felt like the Dawn's Glory. The small fleet deployed to the border regions, and Jake went with them. Vecnir had insisted that he remain aboard the Void's Whisper, arguing that his presence might be needed if any issues arose. The truth was that she had come to value his perspective on more than just engineering matters. His outsider's view helped her see situations from different angles. They had been on patrol for 2 weeks when the Draxian Confederacy made its move. A fleet of Draxian warships crossed the border, heading toward a Keltharian mining colony. It was a clear act of aggression, possibly the opening move in a larger conflict. "All ships, battle stations," Captain Kelsith's voice came over the fleet-wide channel. "We are outnumbered 3-1, but we have advantages they do not expect. We will use our enhanced speed to dictate the terms of engagement. Captains, you have tactical freedom. Show them what our ships can do." The battle began at extreme range. The Draxian ships were larger and more heavily armed than the Keltharian vessels, but they were also slower and less maneuverable. Under normal circumstances, the Keltharians would have been forced into a defensive posture, using their superior shields to weather the storm while calling for reinforcements. But these weren't normal circumstances. The Keltharian ships accelerated to speeds the Draxians hadn't thought possible, closing the distance and then breaking away before the enemy could bring their heavy weapons to bear. They attacked from multiple angles simultaneously, their enhanced weapon systems hitting harder than expected. Their shields, running at increased efficiency, absorbed damage that should have crippled them. Jake watched from the Void's Whisper's bridge as the battle unfolded on the tactical display. It was like watching a dance where one side had suddenly learned new steps. The Draxians were confused, reacting slowly to tactics they hadn't prepared for. "Their command ship is trying to fall back," Zekdil observed. "They're retreating." "Pursuit course," Vecnir ordered. "We will not allow them to regroup." The enhanced Keltharian ships ran down the retreating Draxians, forcing them to either stand and fight or abandon their invasion. They chose to flee, jumping to faster-than-light speed and leaving the border region entirely. The battle had lasted 18 minutes. The Keltharians had suffered minor damage but no casualties. The Draxians had lost 2 ships and retreated with their tails between their legs. "All ships, status report," Kelsith ordered. One by one the captains reported. Shields holding, weapons systems optimal, engines performing beyond expectations. Not a single ship had suffered the kind of catastrophic failures that the skeptics had predicted. "It appears," Kelsith said, and Jake could hear the smile in her voice, "that we have a new standard for fleet performance. All ships return to station. There will be much to discuss." The victory sent shockwaves through both the Keltharian Empire and the wider galactic community. How had a small Keltharian fleet defeated a numerically superior Draxian force? The answer, once it became known, was even more shocking than the victory itself. A human mechanic had shown the Keltharians how to improve their ships. Jake suddenly found himself famous, or perhaps infamous, depending on who was talking. The Keltharian Engineering Corps officially adopted many of his modifications as recommended practices. Other species began reaching out, wanting to know if he could improve their ships. The Galactic Engineering Society, which had previously dismissed human techniques as crude, invited him to present a paper at their annual conference. "You've started something," Vecnir told him. They stood together on the observation deck of the Void's Whisper, watching stars stream past as the ship traveled through faster-than-light space. "The galaxy is beginning to recognize that humans have valuable perspectives to offer." "It's not just humans," Jake said. "Every species has unique approaches, unique insights. The Veldras build ships that can adapt to any environment. The Krix create propulsion systems that are works of art. The Taraxans make armor that can self-repair. Everyone has something to teach if we're willing to learn from each other." "A noble sentiment," Vecnir said, "though I suspect the reality will be more complicated. There will be resistance, pushback from those who fear change or see collaboration as weakness." "There's always resistance," Jake agreed. "But you know what? That battle we just won, that's going to be hard to argue with. Results matter, and we got results. We did indeed. Vecnir turned to face him fully. I have been authorized to offer you a permanent position with the Keltharian fleet. You would have your own engineering division, resources, authority to implement changes as you see fit. You would be well compensated. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering. It was an incredible offer, the kind of opportunity most engineers dreamed of. But something held him back. I appreciate it, Captain, I really do. But I think I can do more good as an independent consultant. If I'm part of the Keltharian fleet, other species might be hesitant to work with me. They might see me as representing Keltharian interests rather than offering neutral expertise. But if I stay independent, I can work with everyone. I can be a bridge between different engineering philosophies. Vecnir nodded slowly. I understand, though I admit I will miss having you aboard. You have been a disruptive influence in the best possible way. I'll still take consulting gigs with the fleet, Jake said with a grin. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Besides, Tolvid and I are working on a dozen new projects. Someone needs to make sure he doesn't get too carried away with the whole controlled chaos thing. They shared a laugh at that. Tolvid had indeed embraced Jake's methods with perhaps too much enthusiasm, recently proposing modifications that even Jake thought were too risky. What will you do next? Vecnir asked. Jake pulled out his battered datapad, scrolling through messages. I've got an offer from a Veldrath trading consortium. They want me to look at their freighter engines. And there's a distress call from a colony ship that's having power problems. Oh, and apparently the Taraxan military wants to talk about armor improvements. He looked up. Busy times ahead. The galaxy will be better for your work, Vecnir said sincerely. You have shown us that progress comes not from rigid adherence to tradition, but from the willingness to question, to experiment, to embrace new ideas. That is a valuable lesson. A few days later, Jake prepared to depart the Void's Whisper. He packed his toolkit, checking to make sure all his custom tools were accounted for. The walls of his temporary quarters were clean now, all his diagrams and calculations transferred to digital files. It looked empty, impersonal, nothing like the organized chaos it had been. The crew gathered in the hangar bay to see him off. It was more attention than Jake was comfortable with, but he understood the gesture. He had become part of the ship's story, part of its identity. Years from now, crew members would tell new recruits about the human engineer who had transformed their vessel. Tolvid approached, carrying a small case. A gift, the Keltharian said. A complete set of Keltharian engineering tools, crafted to the highest standards. They are customized for human hands. Jake opened the case and whistled. The tools were beautiful, elegant, precise. They were also probably worth more than he'd earned in his entire career up to this point. Tolvid, I can't accept these. They're too valuable. You must, Tolvid insisted. You taught me to see beyond the boundaries of my training. These tools represent the best of Keltharian craftsmanship. I hope you will use them to continue your work, blending the best of all species into something greater. Thank you, Jake said, genuinely moved. I'll take good care of them. Captain Vecnir was last to say goodbye. She clasped his shoulder in the Keltharian gesture of respect. May your journey be filled with interesting problems and elegant solutions, Jake Torres. May your ship always fly true, Captain Vecnir. Jake boarded the small transport that would take him to his next job. As the transport pulled away from the Void's Whisper, he looked back at the massive warship. It looked the same as when he'd first seen it, all elegant curves and iridescent hull. But he knew better. The ship had changed in ways that couldn't be seen from the outside. It was faster, stronger, more adaptable. And more importantly, its crew had changed, learning to question old assumptions and embrace new possibilities. That was the real modification he'd made, not to the engines or the power systems or the shields, but to the way the Keltharians thought about engineering itself. The transport jumped to faster-than-light speed, and the void's whisper vanished from view. But Jake knew their paths would cross again. The galaxy was smaller than people thought, and good engineers were always in demand. His datapad chimed with another message. This one was from the Galactic Engineering Society, following up on their invitation. They wanted him to not just present a paper, but to lead a workshop on human engineering techniques. They were calling it Innovation Through Imperfection, a new paradigm for multi-species collaboration. Jake grinned. Someone at the society had a sense of humor. Or maybe they were completely serious, which was even funnier. He pulled up a blank document and started making notes for his presentation. There was so much to say, so many ideas to share. He thought about all the different species out there, each with their own approaches to engineering, their own philosophies and techniques. What could they achieve if they really worked together? If they combined the Keltharian love of elegance with human adaptability, Veldrath flexibility with Taraxan durability, the possibilities were endless. The transport's pilot, a taciturn Crix with blue-green scales, spoke over the intercom. "Passenger Torres will reach our destination in 6 hours. The colony ship you're heading to is in bad shape. They've been limping along on backup power for weeks." "Understood," Jake replied. "That's plenty of time for me to review their systems and come up with a plan." As the stars streamed past and Jake lost himself in technical specifications and creative problem-solving, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what he was meant to do. Not just fix ships, but help species understand each other through the universal language of engineering. Every species had unique strengths. Every culture had insights to offer. And somewhere in the combination of all those different perspectives lay solutions to problems that seemed impossible when approached from a single viewpoint. The galaxy would never be the same, not because one human mechanic had supercharged one alien battleship, but because that single act had demonstrated something important. That progress came from collaboration. That innovation came from questioning assumptions. That sometimes the best solutions were found not in perfection, but in controlled chaos. Jake Torres might have been just a freelance mechanic from a mining station in the asteroid belt, but he had helped start something bigger than himself, a movement toward greater cooperation, better understanding, and engineering solutions that drew from the best that every species had to offer. And that was worth more than any number of perfectly synchronized power crystals. The transport continued on through the void, carrying Jake toward his next challenge. Behind him, the void's whisper continued its patrol, faster and stronger than ever. Across the galaxy, other ships were being modified. Other engineers were learning new techniques, and other species were beginning to question their old assumptions. The age of isolated, single-species engineering was ending. The age of collaboration, of controlled chaos, of innovation through imperfection was just beginning. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, on ships of 100 different designs, human mechanics and alien engineers were rolling up their sleeves and getting to work together. They were combining techniques, sharing knowledge, and discovering that the differences between species weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be celebrated and utilized. The galaxy was changing, one supercharged battleship at a time, and Jake Torres, armed with his toolkit, his Keltharian engineering tools, and his unconventional wisdom, was right in the middle of it all, doing what he did best, making things work better than anyone thought possible. It was going to be one hell of a ride.